Hey guys, I played Avowed for a couple of hours and finished the first area, and now I think I've seen enough of the game to share my first impressions with you. So let's start with an overview of the game systems Avowed is built from. Avowed is a typical exploration-heavy and story-rich RPG which can either be played in third or first person like the Skyrim or Fallout games. It plays in the universe of the Pillars of Eternity games. The core game loop is basically you explore a relatively wide area, there are 4 of these main regions, talk to NPCs, do side quests, and loot everything you can find in every corner you can uncover, while sometimes following the main story questline. So far, nothing unusual for the genre. The explorable area is handcrafted, has a lot of small puzzles and hidden locations. There are a couple of instance dungeons which are so far uniquely enough designed that it doesn't feel as if you would run into the same rabbit hole again and again. Since there are unique weapons and armor you can find in some areas, it generally feels rewarding to try to uncover anything there is. And because enemies mostly do not respawn and items do not regrowth, aside from what the traders sell, there is generally a limited amount of resources, which again makes exploring a worthwhile thing to do. The combat is moderately quick and incorporates typical action RPG maneuvers like dodging, blocking, parrying, shooting, casting, etc. I've seen much worse combat experiences in games, but I've seen better as well. The character systems is made of 5 attribute scores and 3 skill trees for Ranger, Mage and Warrior. The stats are moderately impactful, you can still cast reliably spells if you don't invest in more mana, and you can still do good damage even if you don't invest in more damage, but they definitely help. The active skills that I have tested, which are in the first 2 rows of the skill trees, are fun to play around with and can have a big impact on the combat. But they lack the build diversity and the interesting class choices from the Pillars games. While most of them are somewhat useful so far, there are a few outliers that feel exceptionally strong. The Warrior and Ranger playstyle were playing a little bit like a one-trick pony at the start compared to the Mage. But that could change with more levels when you have more options to mix the classes a little bit. If you find a spell book, you unlock the corresponding spells in your skill tree. Actively slotting it in your side hand allows you to cast the spells from the book at reduced cost, reduced cooldown, and with +1 skill level. That's actually a nice idea, and it makes it fun finding more spell books with different spell combinations attached to it. The passive skills have mostly 3 tiers and are strong enough that they don't feel like the typical do 2% more damage filler nodes that many games use nowadays to bloat their skill trees. The more immersive sim-like aspects like sneak attacking, sniping, preparing ambushes with traps, and the more RPG-like systems like dialogue skill checks, lockpicking and pickpocketing or knowledge skills are either non-existent or completely normalized. For example, everyone can do sneak attacks and everyone can use lockpicks to open doors, but that's pretty much where it ends. Since systems like these are very often when games are not very well executed, I'm not sure if this is a big downside to the game, but at least it feels like something is missing when it comes to character choices. The game incorporates a level gate style system, which exists, for example, in games like Witcher 3, which makes it extremely punishing to fight enemies which are above your level. But in this case, it's not dependent on your character level, but instead if you have upgraded your equipment to the tier the enemy is in. There are 4 tiers of equipment, and if it doesn't match, you are heavily penalized. For direct attacks with weapons, the actual weapon tier you are using is checked for that. For abilities, you only have to have a weapon of the minimum tier equipped in any hand, and for damage taken, your worn armor is responsible. Not matching these requirements can make the combat very difficult. Sadly, this system doesn't make you feel like you have to get stronger so you can defeat an enemy you had to skip for now, but you just have to wait until you find the required key, which is a system I generally don't like. And since it's tied to your specific equipment, it limits the actual build options you have, because if you want to try out a new weapon, you have to upgrade it to the required tier. But as mentioned before, resources are limited. I played the game on Path of the Damned and think that it was relatively challenging at first. Not overly so, but enough to keep the combat exciting. Later in the zone, before I understood that my gear was not at the right tier, the enemies started to get really difficult. And then after upgrading my gear, they became very manageable, if not almost too easy sometimes. But even then they still did a lot of damage. The shield spell with the deflect arrows upgrade felt like a requirement though. The game so far had a couple of interesting encounters where you had to fight high amounts of enemies. These encounters were definitely one of the better designed aspects of the game, but I can't say for now if this will get boring when I proceed further into the game or if it will become too easy, which is a thing a lot of those types of games have in common. Compared to older games from Obsidian, combat feels like a big step forward. In typical Obsidian fashion, the dialogues are well done and take a lot of time to go through if you don't skip through them, but not to the degree that they completely disturb the exploration game flow. Some of the characters I do like and some not so much, but so far the game doesn't have the rich storytelling aspects of some of the former Obsidian games like the gritty world from Fallout New Vegas or the social big corporations related humor from Outer Worlds. The graphics are very colorful, which takes a little bit away from the darker themes that can come up in the story. Personally, I like a more grounded medieval coloring, but that's of course pure taste. The character builder is probably not the most in customizability out there, but it has a couple of options which allow for quite a bit of character expression, so no letdown here for me. But stuff like that isn't so important for me anyway. The technical state of the game was slightly buggy for me. There was one quest I couldn't complete and a couple of crashes. All in all, I didn't expect all too much from the game since the gameplay from the two former action RPGs from Obsidian didn't have very good combat or build crafting, and since I did know that I wouldn't get the character options from Pillars, my expectations were very low. So far the game definitely delivered above from what I was expecting, and currently it looks like it could be a good amount of fun to play further, but it's definitely not a game that has created an unforgettable experience either. But since it's part of the Game Pass, it's definitely worth its money for me. I have already gotten enough fun hours out of it. That's my take on Avowed after a couple of hours. What's your experience so far? If you like that content, please subscribe and keep on gaming.